The exhibition is part of a symposium presented by the University of Houston Women's Studies Program. The opening reception is actually an event of this weekend's symposium. The title of the symposium is Gender, Creativity, and the New Longevity. But it really started out being called Women, Creativity, and Aging. And I was invited to curate an exhibition in which Houston artists addressed the theme and maybe addressed the question, how do we spend this new part of our lives? Another idea came into it right away, and that was for Houston to have its own 30th anniversary celebration of the kind of feminist art activism that was recognized earlier this year in exhibitions like WAC. In Houston, the Women's Caucus for Art began in 1978, 30 years ago, inspired by International Women's Year Conference, sponsored by the United Nations in Houston in 1977. And about half the artists in this show were part of the art activism of that 30 years ago period. They've been living and working in Houston all this time, contributing to Houston's cultural identity. So for them, it's a reunion. But there are actually 3 generations represented in the show. The conversation that this exhibition is about is one that spans generations, and there are women in the show ages 25 to 75, which I think made it particularly interesting for me because it turned out that the artists that I visited with all were interested in a theme, not of aging at all, but of time. And each one of the 16 artists in the exhibition is working out her own relationship to time considered in some dimension, and they all talked to me about how they felt about the passage of time and how the age that they were affected the work that they made. One of the first things I found out is that when an artist goes in the studio, she's not thinking about how old she is any more than she's thinking about what color her eyes are. That's really not how the creative process works at all. But people did talk about how they felt that the passage of time had changed their approach to art. And a really interesting example is Mary Genuine, whose work is behind me here. These boxes, which are tableaus of scenes of things going on around the world today, that it's awfully easy for us to skip over in the newspaper. Mary told me a story about starting out as a young artist and being told to paint what she knew. She said, what did I know? I was 20 years old. All I knew was myself. So I kept painting myself, but I wasn't very interesting looking because I was only 20, so I would make myself look older so that my paintings would be more interesting. She said, now that I'm older, what I'm interested in is the world I'm living in and the times that we're living in and what is going on in the time of our time and the question of how we relate to that and do we pay attention and what does it mean. So she said, my work has definitely changed over time. I've gotten less interested in myself and more interested in the world around me. Maybe you could show one of the boxes closer up. Roberta Harris's work involves time, but on a very much more meditative and timeless level. The grids in her paintings really reflect an iconography that's found worldwide, she says, that has to do with a sort of spiritual journey up the steps to a higher plane, and the birds in the work refer to that as well. So that in contrast to Mary's work, which is very much about our time and current events, Roberta's engaged with time on a much longer span and in a very cross-cultural way in terms of the imagery that she's working with. Then memory and identity and the sort of ephemerality and changeful nature of those is another theme that runs through the work of a great many of the artists, again, of varying ages and working in different media. And Rachel Hecker, for example, makes, I don't know if you can see them behind me, she makes oversized, scale model oversized lists and notes and appointment cards and memos, things like grocery lists that she actually found in her kitchen drawers because, as she pointed out, the moment
is all there really is. And many of our moments are spent making lists that say cottage cheese, low-fat milk. They're not actually spent day to day thinking or accomplishing a single huge thing. So in her view, to recognize how central these ephemeral moments are, these little lists and tasks and notes that we make, is a way of recognizing that the life we're actually living is being lived one moment to the next moment, and all those little scraps that we think of as trash are records of those little moments. But she also has made an oversized set of Buddhist prayer beads, and that's another very ritualistic, repetitive way of using the passage of time in a kind of meditative fashion to, again, move your own consciousness to a level of time that's very much the opposite of the everyday time of the grocery list. You might have to stop